We had overtime in the Battle of Ontario, a shutout in the Sunshine State, a hat trick in St. Louis, and a star shining bright in the state of hockey. All that coming up right now on Locked On NHL Game Night.
When that final horn sounds, you know it's time for Locked On NHL Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. Prepare to experience game day reactions like never before. Only on Locked On NHL Game Night. Your team every day.
Hey, hockey fans, welcome to Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thanks for making Locked On NHL Game Night your place to get a recap of the night in the NHL. We are available 7 days a week, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. I'm Eddie Garcia, an LA Kings fan on the West Coast. He is Shukri Wrights, a Boston Bruins fan on the East Coast, and together we are here to discuss all the goals, saves, big moments, and stories from the night in the Stanley Cup playoffs with the help of some of our local experts. And Shu, another interesting night of action in the quest for Lord Stanley's Cup. My Stanley Cup pick, not looking so good. Yours looking pretty good so far.
Sometimes you got to go with your gut reaction, and sometimes your gut turns out to be right. But it is early, but I tell you what, tonight was definitely an eye-opener for a lot of reasons. I can't wait to get into as to why it has been an eye-opening night for me.
Well, let's start with my pick to win the Stanley Cup. And I knew if they could escape the first round, they would probably do well. But that's not looking so great at the moment. I'm talking about the Tampa Bay Lightning taking on the Florida Panthers. Game 2 of their series in Tampa. And the defending champion Florida Panthers sent a message with an impressive 6-2 road win in Game 1. I felt like there needed to be a similar message sent back by the Lightning in Game 2. That didn't happen as the defending champs post a 2-0 win, back-to-back road wins for the Florida Panthers for a 2-0 series lead. Let's get a report on this game from our local expert, the host of Locked On Panthers.
This offense had no answers against the defending Stanley Cup champions. What is up, guys? Armando Velez here from the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, here from Amalie Arena as the Panthers defeat the Tampa Bay Lightning by a final score of 2-0 in Game 2 to take a 2-0 series lead back to sunrise. And the key for the Panthers has been the penalty killing. They went 5 for 5 on the evening, and the thing is, the Panthers were put on the pressure as the Lightning were gaining the zone and did not allow the second chances for Tampa Bay, and Sergei Bobrovsky was able to see pucks easily. The Panthers get the first goal of the game, 4 minutes and 15 seconds, thanks to Nate Schmidt. Now 3 goals in 2 games in the first round, and the Panthers, the only concern right now for them is the health of Alexander Barkov, who left the game with 10 minutes to go due to an interference call on Brandon Hagel that resulted in a 5-minute major. We're going to break all this down on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Your team every.
And thanks to Armando Velez from Locked On Panthers for that report. We'll get into the hit by Brandon Hagel and the status of Alexander Barkov in a minute. But Shu, I picked Tampa Bay to win it all, and I knew this was going to be a tough series, although I am surprised how it's gone so far, specifically the offense for Tampa Bay. Braden Point, Jake Gensel, Nikita Kucherov, Brandon Hagel, those 4 guys combined for 155 goals this year. So far in this series, they've got 2. They've been outscored by Panthers defenseman Nate Schmidt, who has 3 goals in 2 games. This is not how I saw this series going so far. Not saying I'm shocked by the Panthers. They're a great team, the defending Stanley Cup champs, but I am surprised at what we've seen from Tampa Bay so far.
You know, early in this show, I teased that tonight has been an eye-opening night for me. This is the number one reason why tonight for me has been an eye-opening night for me in regards to Stanley Cup playoffs. Because the Florida Panthers, let's face it, a year ago, they were the best defensive team in hockey, far and away. Tonight, we were reminded just how good defensively they are. And in fact, you talked about this already. The Tampa Bay Lightning have a grand total of just 2 goals in this entire series so far. Nate the Great Schmidt, 3. But that's not what's blown me away. There's 2 things that's blown me away in terms of this game in particular. Number one, the Tampa Bay Lightning all season, they have scored a total of 294 regular season goals. That's the most in the league. 2 this entire series. And here's the other part of it too. The other part of that's really stood out to me in terms of the Panthers is defensively. Is that when you talk about the Panthers and their shot blocking ability, they've only allowed a handful and they've blocked 20 shots in this game. And that goes to show you that their structure is incredibly successful. No matter what injuries or obstacles that they may face, their defense has been astute through these first 2 games. And of course, goalie Bob, Sergei Bobrovsky, whenever the Panthers have made mistakes, which has been very far and few in between, he's been there to save the day. And lastly, I got to give it to you. I didn't think that Nate Schmidt will be as big of a factor offensively for the Panthers as he has been so far through the first games, but he has been the big story for the Panthers in terms of the depth, but as well as getting offense from where you least expected as well.
I'm pretty sure Nate Schmidt didn't expect it either, if he's being honest. No. But Sergei Bobrovsky, a 19-save shutout. He didn't stand on his head in this one. He was fine. He made saves when he needed to. But I think you're right. It is the total team defense of the Florida Panthers that has so far shut down this powerful Lightning offense. And Armando mentioned it, the power play for Tampa Bay. It's got to be a lot better with all those weapons. 0 for 5 in game 2. Now 0 for 8 in the series. Obviously, if they can't score on the power play to get that offense going, they're going to be in some trouble. Armando mentioned this as well. There was a big moment in this game, 1-0 game, 10 minutes left in the third. Tampa Bay's on a power play, and Brandon Hagel puts a huge hit on Alexander Barkov. Problem was the puck wasn't near him. It was an interference penalty, and because of the violence of the hit, he got a 5-minute major. Now, Tampa Bay was fortunate. They did kill off the entire penalty, but it also ate up 5 minutes of time that they could have used to try and tie that game up. So that was obviously a bad play on Hagel's part. But more importantly for the whole series and beyond possibly for Florida is the status of their captain, Alexander Barkov. No update afterwards. He left the game, didn't return. Obviously, if Florida does advance, his status going forward will be important. My question to you, though, is Brandon Hagel's hit. Obviously, it was illegal. Obviously, it was very violent, and it created an injury. Do you think the NHL will suspend Brandon Hagel, a very important offensive player for Tampa Bay, for any length of time in the series?
I don't think they would, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did either, considering that, that the league overall has done a pretty good job of cracking down on illegal hits, such as the one that Brandon Hagel laid out onto Alexander Barkov tonight in this game. But I don't expect the league to suspend him, but I do think that the penalty was very much warranted, considering that it was completely unnecessary and the puck was already gone. So for me, I think justice was already served. Now, if the NHL decides to suspend Brandon Hagel, then I can't say I'd be surprised, but I do think that that certainly that the penalty was served, and in fact, justice, I think retribution will be served possibly in game 3 when they return back down to Sunrise.
Yeah, I agree with you. I wouldn't be totally shocked because it was an illegal play that led to an injury of a star player. But the NHL normally only hands out suspensions for something involving the head. And even though that was a violent hit, it wasn't a shoulder making direct head contact. So I don't think they're going to suspend Brandon Hagel either. But I think I agree with you. It was certainly worthy of a 5-minute major, and hopefully Alexander Barkov is okay. But the Florida Panthers, a 2-0 series lead, winning the first 2 games on the road. They got Aaron Ekblad coming back for game number 3 now, so they're getting stronger, even if they do lose Alexander Barkov. So I don't know what I tried to look it up. I don't know what the stats are for a team that wins the first 2 games on the road and their success in that playoff series. I'm guessing, though, it's pretty good. I'm guessing Florida is very happy with the start they've had so far in this one, and Tampa Bay is got their hand over the panic button right now.
As they should, because there lies a problem with the Tampa Bay Lightning when they're trying to beat the Panthers. Defensively, they're so physical, they're relentless, and you just mentioned Aaron Ekblad is coming back for game number 3. Holy smokes, what a comeback, what a return is going to be for the Panthers, and what a lift is going to be on their blue line. And that's only going to make the Panthers even stronger, even though obviously that the status of Alexander Barkov is going to be up in the air moving forward, because we don't know just how bad the injury is. But man, I think the biggest question mark for John Cooper as the series shifts to Sunrise, Florida is going to be, how do you generate offense on 5-on-5? And how do you get things going on the power play? Neither of which has been very much effective against these Florida Panthers, defending Cup champions.
All right, up next, the Battle of Ontario goes to Ottawa, and it goes overtime again. That is next on Locked On NHL Game Night. Do you know that your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into thousands of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 to Avowed as easily as you stream your favorite shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. With 4K streaming, watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribed services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, Max, and more. I'm old enough to remember when video games started. I still love playing video games, and I love playing EA NHL as well. Head over to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. That's Amazon.com Fire TV Locked On, Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription, and compared controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K second gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max first and second gen, and Fire TV Cube third gen. All right, we have Maple Leafs Senators Game 3, first two games in Toronto goes the way of the Maple Leafs. Series now shifting to Ottawa, where they have waited 8 years to see some home playoff action. The crowd was amazing. The atmosphere was great. And the game was decided in overtime. But in the end, Sens fans go home disappointed. Let's get a report on this game from one of our co-hosts of Locked On Maple Leafs.
We're on the brink of the second round after earning another overtime victory over the Ottawa Senators. I'm David Morissette from the Locked On Leafs podcast, and it was another unlikely hero who ends the game for the Toronto Maple Leafs, with Simon Benoit wiring home a point shot past Linus Ullmark. The Leafs now take a 3-0 series lead in a best-of-7 series for the first time since 2001, and it was against the Ottawa Senators. Mike DeStefano and I will break down the victory and get you set up for Game 4, where the Leafs will have a chance to end the series. Keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.
And 3-2 in overtime, Toronto for the second straight game, a 3-2 overtime win. And Dave mentioned it. You never know who's going to be a hero in a Stanley Cup playoff game. For the Leafs, it was defenseman Simon Benoit. But your pick to win the Stanley Cup, the Toronto Maple Leafs, looking pretty good so far. What have you liked about the Leafs to this point?
I think there's a few things that I liked about the Toronto Maple Leafs up until this point, but there's two that stands out to me in particular. Number one, the Stanley Cup playoffs has a way of unearthing heroes when you least expect it. Simon Benoit was one of them tonight. In my opinion, I think Simon Benoit has got to be the MVP of this game, considering that he was responsible for blocking two shots that were close to goal. And then that laser shot that where he scored that game-winning goal in overtime, that beat Linus Ullmark. I mean, my gosh. I mean, I don't even think Ullmark even saw the puck like pass him. That's how fast it was. But I think also when you talk about the Leafs and what you've seen throughout this entire series is getting contribution not just from your top guns, but from up and down the line, including your decor, as I just mentioned about Simon Benoit. But then also the power play in this series. The Maple Leafs have 5 power play goals so far this series, and that's been a huge help for this Toronto Maple Leafs, in that we knew going into this series that they were dangerous on a man advantage, but they've also have scored big timely goals, especially on the man advantage. And I think that is something that is bold for them very well. And I also really like the play of Anthony Stolarz so far in this series.
Yeah, I was going to say that going into this series, one of the questions I had was how would Anthony Stolarz fare in his first playoff action as a number one goalie, and so far so good for the Leafs. Unfortunately for Ottawa, they waited a long time for this home playoff game. The crowd was great. It was a great atmosphere, but unfortunately for them, it does not finish the way that they wanted. They're now down 0-3 against their provincial rivals. For the other side of this story, let's check in with one of the co-hosts of Locked On Senators.
Like that, the Ottawa Senators are facing elimination. I'm Ross Levitan from Locked On Senators, and tonight it was a 3-2 overtime loss for the Sens at home in front of a packed pro-Ottawa crowd. A lot of talk about how many Leaf fans would be in the building. Sens fans showed up, and they got the tying goal. Brady Tkachuk in the third period. First shot of the period, over 10 minutes in, and this one went to overtime for a second straight game. For another game, it was also a bad overtime goal. The last time it was a 2-on-4 rush. Puck goes off the post and in. This time it was a lost faceoff that cost the Ottawa Senators, who are now trailing 3-0 in their best of 7 against the Toronto Maple Leafs. For more, we'll break this down on the postcast. We're available wherever you get your podcasts, including on YouTube.
Thanks to the great Ross Levitan, one of the co-hosts of Locked On Senators, for that report. So again, back-to-back 3-2 overtime losses for the Sens, trailing in the series 3-0. Obviously, Toronto looking to close it out in Ottawa on Saturday. Now, I do know this stat because my LA Kings were a part of it. There have been 4 teams in the history of the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs that have been down 3-0 to come back to win. My Kings did it in 2014 against the San Jose Sharks. Yep. The Toronto Maple Leafs actually did it in 1942. They were the only team that did it in the Stanley Cup final. Yeah. But right now, the Sens, they can't think about winning 4 in a row. It's just about winning 1. It's about keeping the season alive for 1 more game.
And I agree. And if they're going to get back into the series, stop me if I sound like a broken record, but you're going to need the Senators to completely turn their power play around. It has been a problem this series, but especially tonight, they had 4 power play opportunities, only came away with 1 power play goal. And that was Claude Giroux's game-opening power play goal, and that was it. And I think it's become problematic, where especially when you're committing like costly penalties, that's costing the Senators in terms of goals that are pucks that end up in the back of their own net. And I think that just cannot happen. And I think that also that if you're the Senators, that you have got to figure out a way what's going to be the best way to beat Stollards, and they have not been able to figure it out. But then also, more importantly, I also will even go as far as to say that you have to wonder about Linus Ullmark. Linus Ullmark, he played well tonight. Make no question about it. But you need him to be great if they're going to get back into the series and, heck, even force a Game 5 back in Toronto.
Well, game number 3 of the 4 games on the schedule we're going to talk about is the St. Louis Blues hosting the President's Trophy winning Winnipeg Jets. Game 3 as the series shifts from Manitoba to St. Louis, Missouri. And the Blues, like the Senators, were hoping for a home ice win to get back in the series. But unlike the Sens, they were able to pull off a big win, 7-2 over the Jets. St. Louis with 3 goals in the first period, 4 more in the third. Pavel Buchnevich with a hat trick in the mix as well. And Cam Fowler, the defenseman for St. Louis, a 5-point night. Most points by a Blues defenseman ever in a playoff game with a goal and 4 assists. Also, the first ever playoff win for Blues head coach Jim Montgomery, who once upon a time coached your Boston Bruins. Of course, he got fired early this year, lands on his feet in St. Louis, and engineered them to get into the playoffs. And now they're in this series against the heavily favored Winnipeg Jets.
I mean, what a turnaround for sure. I mean, I thought tonight was their best offensive performance since the opening game in Winnipeg in Game 1. I mean, tonight you talk about a night in which that you're going to remember if you're a Blues fan. And I thought that Pavel Buchnevich really stepped up big offensively in terms of like the hat trick and so forth. But for me, I think also the performance of Cam Fowler cannot be understated in terms of what he was able to do, what he was able to do in terms of creating offense, creating scoring opportunities for other like forwards and so forth, including Jordan Kyrou, who had a big part in tonight's game as well. He played very well, and as well as later in the game, like Colton Parayko chipping in offensively towards the end of the game. So tonight was basically a full experience in which that when you see this Blues team play up to the capabilities for a full 60 minutes and keep the foot on the gas, this is how good this Blues team can be offensively. And I think also that they were ultimately finally able to solve Connor Hellebuyck as well.
Well, we talked about the President's Trophy winners. Let's get a report on the other side of this from the host of Locked On Jets.
If you're going to lose, I guess the final scoreline doesn't matter. With the Jets having just been defeated by the Blues 7-2, it was an absolutely humiliating, embarrassing game on the road. It should have been a great opportunity for the Jets to tune up against a tough opponent in a very unfriendly rink, and instead the Jets laid one of the absolute biggest eggs possible. Now, listen, DeMello missed, the start of the game and had to sit because he was ill, so obviously the defensive reshuffling had a sizable impact on this game, but by the same token, the Jets just didn't show up for a good stretch of the game, and especially the opening 20 minutes, they were absent. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, from Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We will have a breakdown in further detail of why this game went sideways and what the Jets can do to try and fix things ahead of Game 4 on the weekend on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. But we will see you then. Of course, we hope for a better response on Sunday. As always, go Jets, go.
All right, thanks to Harrison Lee for that report. Connor Hellebuck allowed 4 goals in the first 2 games combined, but 6 goals on 25 shots in this one before getting pulled in the third period. We'll see how he bounces back because he's had some playoff demons. But we've been talking a lot about special teams, and special teams have played a big role throughout this postseason so far. 3 more power play goals for the Blues in this one. They've got 6 power play goals in the 3 games so far. So obviously Winnipeg's penalty kill has to be much better going forward. For the Jets, the score hopefully for them should be irrelevant. I think, as Harrison said, it's just one game. But when you get blown out and your goalie has had some issues in the past, we'll see if they can shake it off and go forward. Jets still lead the series 2-1. Game 4 is Sunday in St. Louis. Kirill the Thrill put on a show for the Minnesota Wild. That's next on Locked On NHL Game Night. Hey, there's nothing like the energy of a live game, whether it's catching a last-minute NHL showdown or soaking up the excitement of an NBA matchup. But finding great seats at a great price, that used to be a challenge until I found Gametime. Gametime makes scoring last-minute tickets easier than ever. Prices actually drop as the event gets closer. And with their all-in pricing, you see the total cost up front. There are no surprises at checkout. Save up to 60% off buying last-minute for sports, concert, comedy, and theater events. And with the seat view before you buy, the no-surprise fees, and a lowest price guarantee, you can book with total confidence. Their lowest price guarantee means I never worry about overpaying. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, our last game to wrap up on this Thursday night in the Stanley Cup playoffs was in Minnesota, where the Wild were hosting the Vegas Golden Knights in Game 3 of their series. Minnesota took one of the 2 games on the road, one of only 2 teams that have been able to get the split in the first 2 games so far, as they won Game 2 in Vegas. How would they do in their first game back on home ice in Game 3? Well, very well. Led by superstar Kirill Kaprizov, the Wild get a 5-2 victory and take a 2-1 series lead. That's the 7th seed now leading the 2 seed in that playoff matchup. Let's get a report from the host of Locked On Wild.
Look now, but after another 5-2 win, the Minnesota Wild have the Vegas Golden Knights on their heels. Hey, everybody, Seth the Topal, host of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, recapping a 5-2 win for the Minnesota Wild in Game 3 to take a 2-1 series lead in the best of 7. This game at the X, the crowd was into it from the get-go because Kirill Kaprizov scored his 3rd goal of the series on the power play with 3 minutes gone in the first period to give the Wild a 1-0 lead. Marco Rossi scored 3 minutes later, his first of the series, before Alex Pietrangelo made it 2-1 after 1. 2 goals for the Wild in the second, courtesy of Matt Boldy and Kirill Kaprizov again, and Marcus Foligno with an empty netter to seal it at 5-2. Philip Gustafsson was sensational in this game, 30 out of 32, and the Minnesota Wild's penalty kill was perfect. By the way, Jack Eichel and Mark Stone, notably quiet in this series with no points yet. Lots of the series to go, so make sure to stay tuned right here to Locked On Wild.
And thanks to Seth Topal, the host of Locked On Minnesota Wild. He mentioned Kirill Kaprizov, Shu. This was a guy early on in the season, was in serious consideration for an MVP, got hurt, tried to come back. It wasn't working out, was back on the injured list. It almost looked like maybe he wouldn't return at all, but has now come back in the playoffs and has been sensational. another great game for him. He had 2 goals in this one, coming off a 2-goal, 1-assist game. And so far on the postseason, he's got 7 points. That's tied for the most in the NHL with Adrian Kempe of the LA Kings and now Cam Fowler of the St. Louis Blues with his big night. But Kirill Kaprizov, we looked at some of the guys that were hurt late in the year, the Tkachuk brothers, Logan Thompson with Washington, some really important players. I don't know that there was any player, though, that was hurt that has come back and has been more impactful for his team than Kirill Kaprizov.
Oh, I make no mistake about it. I mean, so far, I think if you talk about one particular player who has been the biggest story in this Stanley Cup playoffs so far, it's no question Kirill Kaprizov, because of the impact that he has had on this Minnesota Wild team. You saw early in the season when he was healthy, he was a legitimate Hart Trophy candidate, versus when the Wild were without him, this was a team that was absolutely missing everything that he brought to the table. And ever since he's been back, but especially since the start of this series, he has been absolutely tearing it apart in terms of like leading the league in scoring and whatnot. But I would even take it a step further and say that I think the biggest story in this game has been the top line for the Minnesota Wild, especially when you talk about like players like Matt Boldy, who deserves a lot of shine as well. I think it's imperative, if you're Vegas, you've got to find a way to shut down that top line, because so far in this series, obviously we know it's Kirill Kaprizov who has done the most damage, but also Matt Boldy in this game, he's starting to really get going offensively, and you saw him. He had a goal and assist, and I thought that in this game in itself, I thought what was the most interesting aspect of it all was the fact that the Wild's penalty kill finally woke up and went 4 for 4 in this game, which I thought put them over the top in taking this 2-1 series lead.
And some of the Vegas offensive weapons do need to wake up a bit. He mentioned Jack Eichel, Mark Stone, Pavel Dorofeyev, their big goal scorer, has just 1 goal so far in 3 games in the series. So Minnesota with the 2-1 advantage so far in the series. Game 4 will be back in Minnesota coming up on Sunday. And while we have time, let's look at what we have seen so far in the Stanley Cup playoffs as far as where we stand right now. It's been a lot more interesting so far in the West than in the East, but we've got Winnipeg and St. Louis. That series now 2-1 with the home team having won every game so far. Dallas, Colorado, I was skeptical about the Stars coming in, but a couple of overtime wins for them have them leading Colorado 2-1. We've seen we saw the split in Dallas, and then the Stars win the first game in Colorado. So that's been a really interesting one.
Yeah.
We just talked about Minnesota Vegas with the Wild leading that one 2-1. My LA Kings with a 2-0 series over Edmonton. They'll play game 3 north of the border coming up on Friday. So it's been pretty interesting so far in the West. Any of those series in particular kind of caught your eye at this point?
I really got to go with the Dallas Colorado series, and not just because Dallas is up 2-1, but here's what's kind of crazy though. Dallas has not led a whole lot during the series so far, but yet they're up 2-1. And that's the part that kind of like that really stands out like to me. When you think of like seriously that stands out, whether if it's any other series across the NHL, but the way that series has gone has been back and forth in terms of game 1, it was a dominant performance by Colorado. And then now in game 2, obviously it was a much tighter game and whatnot. And then obviously in game 3, more of the same. But I just think that considering that Dallas is up 2-1 in the series, I thought I would see a lot more, but they are certainly missing like Jason Robertson in this series, which is part of the reason why I do think that Dallas has not clicked or have been as red hot offensively as you would hope, but certainly it's got to be the Stars and Avalanche series for me.
Yeah, I cannot disagree at all with that. Dallas came into this thing on a 7-game losing skid. You talk about Jason Robertson, Miro Heiskanen not back yet as well.
Yeah.
So yes, Dallas to have a 2-1 lead at this point, certainly a bit of an eye opener. In the East, it's not that competitive at this point. You've got Toronto with a 3-0 lead over Ottawa. Washington leads Montreal 2-0, Carolina over New Jersey 2-0, and even Florida over Tampa Bay 2-0, even though both wins on the road for the Panthers. But that one hasn't been all that competitive either at this point. Anything in the East that has surprised you so far?
I would say if there was one series in the East that surprised me, I was gonna say the Capitals and Canadians, but I just feel as if that Washington is just a better team, which is why I'm not surprised they're up 2-0. But I do think that what has surprised me in terms of that series is that the Canadians, they certainly have had their chances. And I really like what I've seen so far, especially from like Nick Suzuki, who has shown up in this series, and as well as like some of the other young players on the Montreal Canadiens. But I would say like the Capitals and Canadians have been like surprising. I think it's been closer than what obviously the series would indicate in terms of Washington being up 2-0. So for me, I got to go with Capitals and Canadians.
And we talked about it off the top. I picked Tampa Bay to win the Stanley Cup. So them losing the first 2 games on home ice to me and the way they've lost is pretty shocking. Look, I respect the Florida Panthers tremendously as the defending Stanley Cup champs. And I won't be shocked if they win this series. But if the series continues to go like this and they win it like this, that is going to be a surprise for me. So it's been a very interesting Stanley Cup playoff so far. We've got lots of great action coming up to talk to you about. Thanks for joining us for this one. I'm Eddie Garcia. He's Shukri Wrights. Thanks for watching Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your teams every day. Enjoy the rest of the Stanley Cup playoffs, and we will talk to you with another episode of Locked On NHL Game Night coming up on Friday.